Hello, and welcome to the Ramblecast, where I, the producer, just sort of ramble. Today, this week, I'm going to be reading the beginnings of some short stories I never finished a long time ago. And if possible, I'd like people to let me know in the comments what lines they like most and what they want to see continued. First is Dys. DYS, not this. Anyway. Now, first of all, I, the narrator, am not going to ask you to trust me, because you don't have a choice. Second, I will ask you to understand that none of this will make total sense until you have context. Now, what I assume to be the natural response to that is to wonder where the context is. The trouble is, the context doesn't exist yet. Or perhaps it does. But as of now, it does not. Assume, for now, that it does not exist and will not exist until it is far too late. You hopefully have lots of questions right about now, and I have no intention of addressing even the most glaringly obvious of them. Pay attention, dear reader, and do try not to break the rules. Of course, I shan't tell you what they are, yet, but that's unimportant. On to the narrative. To be wholly accurate, I am not sitting atop a black hole. But, regardless, I am a literal, actual singularity of mass, space, and something else. What else? You don't have a word for it, so I can't explain it except to say that it's something you don't have a word for, and so I can't explain ad infinitum. It defies definition, being by definition defiant. If a single word, phrase, or even an entire language possessed the capacity to make you understand this other thing, then it would become something else. Or, if it didn't, you, that is, all of you, would perish. But you would have your precious context. So now you get that you don't understand, I hope. I am Disthus. To explain what I am, more than to say that it is something not entirely unlike a deity, and rather similar to that indefinable other, is impossible. Any light which reaches close enough to touch me never leaves. I watch the light die. Every last photon, each particle and wave crashing against me, stopping, and slowly, so agonizingly slowly dying. Did you know that light feels pain at the end? I know that. The interesting thing is that I, should I choose to, can touch things. You see, all matter is, fundamentally, actually quite far apart from itself. It just floats. And so, with a little effort, I can keep most of it floating just far enough away from my real self that you don't notice the little bits winking out around the edges. Just like you aren't aware of just how much of the thread of your life you're using up with any and each given decision. And those sorts of things don't even make sense from inside. Causality is just a mess. And I'll never be able to explain to you how bad all that is. Much simpler when you just have effects. Like I said, I can't explain it to you. But imagine, rather than the ends justifying the means, the ends are the means and the ends at once, the whole time. If that doesn't make sense, listen to this next bit twice. Now, you're probably wondering why it is that I'm telling this story? The answer is that I'm telling this story because I am telling this story. Telling this story is me. In the time that I tell this story, I achieve the end of telling the story by telling the story. And from a motivational standpoint, I suppose you could say it's something like this. I'm telling this story because I can, and I don't particularly desire not to tell this story. And besides, part of me is in this story, after all. Now, if the earlier bit didn't make sense, that was the bit to listen to again. Go ahead. Now, I am Dis. My first memory is of sitting atop a black hole. That doesn't make much sense, I suppose, but there I was. And then, pretty soon, I think, it can be hard to tell, what with special relativity and having no actual outside marker of time, and besides, my internal clock is nowadays wrong about 6 times a day, so I doubt I can trust it entirely here, but that's what I've got. Until afterwards, but I'll not get ahead of myself further yet. I am falling through the black hole. Naturally, this is a bit upsetting, being my first ever memory of change. And so when I find myself pushing through some elastic, imperceptible membrane into air, any atmosphere at all is actually quite the change of climate from what I was used to, do remember? Thick with the scent of what I later learned was sandalwood, myrrh, and rose petals, I found myself a bit miffed. The smoke rose from a cerulean blaze atop an obsidian brazier. The spray of blood from the stump where my summoner's right hand used to be splashed across me and extinguished the fire. To her credit, she did not scream. She did gasp and look a bit put off. But then she ground the stump into the still hot embers of the quenched flame, cauterizing it, and spoke thusly. Am I to take it that that is your prize? I know what she means, but she is also wrong. Fool, you think a mere physical appendage a worthy sacrifice? You really must fancy up your words for a mystic, regardless of your actual age, whatever it is. Regardless, you did not summon me. I was sent. That which you so arrogantly called to has taken what might be called an interest, but would certainly not be called an investment. And so, an interlocution. And that is where I will call that story snippet. On to another. I need to sip some water. Her body carries a suggestion of heat, the precursor to discomfort, but ever so alluringly warm. She is stronger than I, and heavier than she looks, but we are each of us stronger than we look. Her weight is no great burden, not when she is buoyed by fever, her hair frazzled and tossed into a halo, hot and dry and waving like a field of topaz grain, ripe for the harvest. But not today. I am sure the Reaper covets her, but he shall not have her for a great deal of time, or so I have sworn. She is my burden, my tormentor, and my purpose, my joy. But just now, she is feverish and tired, her fury spent upon me, and barely awake enough to look up at me with that rare, addictive, grateful smile in her eyes. Were this all I could ever have, it would be more than enough. Enough for me, anyway. Nothing could be enough for her. She knows it, yet will not believe it. She knows there is no miracle solution, no final sacrifice. But she does not accept that she would deserve one if there were, and doubts of what would happen should she cease to deserve even this. I know it is not her fault, as does she, but she simply cannot believe that I will always wish to preserve her at any expense. It serves no purpose to linger upon it now, and so I put it away. Instead, I hold her closer to my wounded chest. There is no blood there to stain her this time. Her heat reminds my burns of their pain, and they flare up as she presses her face to them. Chimeras. I feel her mouth moving as I mount the stairs to her room more than I hear her voice, and I shiver at her use of my name. And that is where I'm going to leave up on that one. Let's see, have I got any more? Okay, no, that was a project. Open. BTPP. Ooh, I think this is one I actually might have. Oh my goodness. This one is one of my favorite work in progresses I have. The working title is Bones of Blood-Stained Wood. The foreign hunter's bullet sends his own gun, along with half a finger, spinning off the balcony with a sound like a dreaming god blinking. He's undeterred. He will protect young Annalise. He grips his blade, his trusted, beloved blade, in both hands, and his blood oozes not down to the floor, but up the pulsing grooves of the katana. He can feel his essence flowing faster from him. But this is a place beyond all pain, beyond all fears but one. Another pale blue bullet sinks into his shoulder, but he shrugs it off and charges, pushing the intruder against a wall. Somewhere, deep inside, a moment of apology to the diligent cleaners for the mess he won't live to help clean up with. Sorry, I added the with there. That wasn't in it. Somewhere deep inside, a moment of apology to the diligent cleaners for the mess he won't live to help clean up. He rears his head back before bringing the pointed chin of his helm down into his adversary's clavicle. A crunch resonates through the paper-thin metal, bone pushed too far, failing to hold together. Intent on the perceived opening, the bloody crow takes a half-step back, sword already in position for an upward diagonal cut. His spilt blood scores a smoking groove into the ground as the blade swings. Time seems to slow as the foreign hunter, with a resolve that demands respect, raises the twin barrels of their gun. He can't close his eyes, even as those pallid projectiles pierce his helm. All is darkness, and all he can feel is his agonizing death grip on Chikage's handle, and the sudden, invasive pressure of a hand, or perhaps a claw, forced into his chest. It closes around his heart's last desperate attempt at a beat as blood roars in his mangled head. She awakens in a new way for the first time. Not only is she gripped by her master, but she has hands to embrace him. His face, exposed by partial destruction of his helmet, is peaceful, save for his darting eyes. Slowly, the erratic motion still, and his lids flutter open. Odd, she thinks. His eyes were blue before, not amber. Before she can inquire, however, she's faced with a question she'd never expected or considered. Who? The hunter once known as the Bloody Crow croaked. There's an instinctual recognition which, were it not fighting freshly blossoming instincts, would have answered for him. And, as it is, he knows the person, the young girl before him, but not who she is. She isn't Annalise. The princess's hair was blonde, not at all like the oily black of this girl's heavy locks. But something in her eyes. He growls involuntarily. Master, I am... And then he does recognize her. With her hand in his, he recognizes her, and more urgently, what is happening to him. The claw points of his gauntlet bite into her hand hard enough to draw blood, and she flinches away, startled to bleed for the first time. Chikage. Run! Hands that strain against suddenly undersized metal dig into the ground. An elongating lower jaw with razor edges struggles and fails to form a goodbye. The faux wings of his mantle bulge, growing into his back like roots and drinking deep of the nightmarish blood in his veins. With the scene playing out before her, she doesn't need to be told twice. She looks around, shocked to find herself in what she can only assume to be the city she left, based on the portrait she recalls. She flees to the nearby chapel, clambering up a tapestry to hide on a balcony. The beast, there's no getting around it, the beast that was once her master, shrieks outside. She fancies that there is, perhaps, a note of mourning in that baleful howl. But fancies are not enough to risk life and limb, freshly gained though they might be. In all likelihood, she's lost here, alone. Her tears sizzle on the marble floor, a murky red oozing from the corners of her eyes as she mourns. Though, until this event, she had no autonomy. Her memory stretches back, and with a sort of sixth sense she'd had all along, she remembers the feeling of her master's love. That the feeling will only ever be a memory is a realization that racks her frame with silent sobs. Perhaps if the bloody little lady knew she was being watched, she would have been still as well as silent. But the girl digging serrated nails into the rafters isn't ready to make her presence known quite yet. She has her own grief, and has a sense of the rage that must be burning within that sorrow. She remembers her fury at her own master's rampage, under this same damnable moon. Once the fire has cooled, she hopes she can offer what few answers she holds, and perhaps solidarity. I'll leave that there. Ooh, lewd. Can't read that on this one. When I was born into this world, I was given the name Margaret. Perhaps, if my mother had survived the event, she would have named me something else. Or, if my father's word is to be trusted, she would have sooner glutted herself on my heart. In other words, there had only ever been room in the world for one of us, and so it seemed proper to father that we share a name. Or perhaps he missed her and didn't want to learn a new name. It matters not. Okay, next one. It had not, if only technically, been an unhappy ending. What it had been was many things. An unhappy compromise, a tangle of loose ends, a slashed throat. It is, I would say, a reasonably consistent habit of many to be in denial of their own healing. The memory of pain doesn't go away just because the wound does. No matter. If I have learned anything in half a millennium, it is that one must write to one's audience. This holds true, even when the audience may never bear the story witness. Leave that one there, even though there's more. That's a note to myself. Ooh, I gotta read this one. So this was meant to have alien weathermen in it, but I never got that far. Statistically speaking, it was a day like any other. From the perspective of an outside observer, it was nothing at all. A chapter cut from the final draft of a manuscript, abandoned pages cast to the wind. From the perspective of the survivors, a prologue. For Ephraim Kranz III, head of esoteric acquisitions at Laguna Bay Athenaeum, it was a damned headache. The readings printing out from the observatories weren't possible, of course. In fact, while Ephraim rubbed his temples in frustration, wishing for things to start making sense, they corrected themselves. Of course, nothing that massive could have just appeared in the mines. Of course, there's no way it actually has that tense of an energy signature. Of course, he has to go check anyway. Was this one Blessed Incisions in the Canvas? Mm-hmm. Ew. This one's a classic. There was old gods here once. Dead gods. The kind people don't take kindly to being reminded of. He pauses, lighting a new cigarette and tossing the still-lit match in the butt together into the underbrush. And the feelings was mutual. A picture of Smokey pops into my head, and I look after the thrown fire starters. I wouldn't worry about that. Hell, I'd be glad to find out I burned this place down by accident. The answer comes before the question, but I supposed I telegraphed it clearly enough, even in the dim starlight. Suppose I'd be a bit miffed, though, after all the times I couldn't do it on purpose. On purpose? Of course. Like I said, the gods that used to be here. Used to be here. You hear? They're none too palatable. Wouldn't mind torching our old homestead. We walk on in silence for a while, and a thought bubbles up, slow and sure, like the swamp gas in the dirt. How does a god die? The old man stops stops and takes a long, long drag of his cigarette until I wonder if there's any room in his lungs for actual air amid all the heat and smoke. Perhaps there isn't, but even so, he speaks eventually. Differs from God to God in the details, but they all die with a few things in common. They all die mean, ugly, and dead. Some even start that way. Start mean and ugly? Nah, they all start mean, but some start dead. That shuts me up for a while, long enough for us to reach the clearing. The light of the moon is hazy, strained through the thin sheet of mist that hangs just above the treetops. So it is real. What? You came this far without being sure you'd find what you were looking for? I don't tell him that I had to know, because then he might ask why. Yeah, I guess I did. He just snorts, a puff of smoke rising to join the mist. The clearing is strangely circular, and rather than the marshy ground of the wilderness around it, there is an off-white, barren surface. Looking at it hurts my eyes, and I can't figure out why. Is there something I'm not quite seeing? Something I'm missing? Maybe I'm not close enough. Another step closer couldn't hurt. Oh, yes, it could. It could hurt an awful lot. People are rightfully scared of stepping on the graves of dead men. Stands to reason you ought to be scared of tromping right on a dead god's corpse. He puts his arm in my path before I even move to advance, and for a moment it blocks my view and I see it, just out of the corner of my eye. But the ghost of the raised tower stands clear and cold like a needle piercing the earth's crust. Vertigo nearly overwhelms me in that briefest of instants, and I stumble back, head craning to search for the top of the spire that isn't there. Had Dee said something about where they had walked the earth before? And would one day walk again? Between that and bidirectional ghosts, it wasn't outside the realm of, for lack of a better word, possibility that this was a premonition or warning. A sign of their imminent coming and our imminent and inevitable to get a hold of yourself. The geezer's palm hits me like a bolt from the blue, dissipating the growing mirage of that impossible tower. Like I said, he continues, they only used to be here. You got that? His hand grasps my chin, and I see the desperate look in his eyes by the light of the bobbing cigarette in his mouth. I blink and nod, and the looming danger recedes. The tension goes out of him, and he helps me up reassuringly. Now, what say we head back, now that you've seen what you came to see? Yeah, let's do that. It would be a lie to say that at that moment the atmosphere had changed. A lie of omission. Looking back, I cannot help but feel that the silence of that night was more ominous than I could fathom. I can't help but feel that I was spurred on by a lingering influence, and that my choice to retire not to my rented bedchamber, but instead secret myself into the local library's restricted section to corroborate my findings was not wholly my own. Needless to say, they were corroborated in full. Alright. Well, that's, I'm excited to get back to writing. I am gonna go ahead and render this up, slapdash together a thumbnail for it, upload it, and head to sleep. Think about these ideas. Hoping y'all have opinions on what I should write more of, what I should finish, what I should read more of, what kind of things you want to see. I really enjoy writing for an audience. And when I was writing that, I had people I could throw my writing at all the time, and they'd read it and give me opinions. And it's annoying not having so much of that anymore. So if y'all could do me that little favor, that'd be splendido. All right. Bye bye, Anar.